Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matt Vahabi. I'm a veterinarian with the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Animal Health Branch. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so this presentation will cover the interim rule for the highly pathogenic avian influenza. Let me turn my camera off, actually. Okay. Okay, so this presentation will cover the interim rule for the highly pathogenic avian influenza biosecurity compliance audit program that was implemented at the end of 2024. It will also introduce some additional biosecurity assessment resources that are available to producers. Historically, highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, outbreaks have had significant economic, production, and industry-related repercussions, with billions of dollars in losses and hundreds of millions of birds being lost. The most recent wave of losses in California from fall 2024 to spring 2025 has been much greater than the previous wave in winter 2023 to 2024, as demonstrated via the table on the right. This new interim rule, which is in effect as of December 31st, 2024, has been created to address previous biosecurity practices that have not been adequate to prevent infection and reinfection. In addition, with this virus now affecting dairy cattle, which can lead to spillover infections in adjacent poultry premises, there is an extra source of exposure for infection, thereby demonstrating the need for more robust biosecurity practices. Since the virus first made its way onto dairy farms in California in late August 2024, more than 760 dairies have been infected at some point. The image on the left is a heat map, which shows the intensity or prevalence of this virus in dairies throughout the state between August 2024 and February 2025. The yellow areas represent areas with the highest density of confirmed cases. While we saw a significant reduction in the number of newly infected dairy and poultry premises each week, starting in late February 2025, there has been a recent increase in the number of dairy redetections identified since late June 2025. Here are some definitions relating to the animal disease response and movement controls. As seen in the map, a buffer zone surrounds each infected premises and includes at-risk premises. A control area is the region surrounding an infected premises that contains infected and buffer zones. We thought it would be worthwhile to clarify what it means to be a buffer zone premises. These premises are those that are located within the buffer zone surrounding an infected premises. On the map on this slide, the central white dot represents the infected premises. The black dots within the blue zone represent buffer zone premises. Buffer zone premises are typically located within 10 kilometers of an infected premises and are placed under quarantine. As a result, buffer zone premises must request permits for any movement of birds onto or off of their premises. Regular surveillance testing is also conducted at these premises. Lastly, due to a buffer zone being placed around each infected premises, it is possible for a buffer zone premises to be located in multiple buffer zones. A key point that needs to be made is indemnity payments are now conditional upon successfully passing a biosecurity audit. If a producer chooses to place poultry on their premises, which is located in a buffer zone created on or after December 31st, 2024, without successfully completing a buffer zone placement biosecurity audit, then they will not be eligible for federal indemnity for the life of the placed birds. Similarly, for a premises placing or restocking birds on a previously infected premises, successfully passing a BCAP audit before placement of new birds is required to be eligible for indemnity payments. Premises involved in this program will include commercial poultry premises that are either buffer zone premises that are requesting to move poultry onto their premises, or previously infected premises that were depopulated and are now looking to restock. This interim rule applies to all commercial poultry operations that do not fall under the exemptions that are listed on the right side of the slide. As previously mentioned, successfully passing a BCAP audit will be required to be eligible for indemnity before moving poultry into a buffer zone or restocking a previously infected premises for eligible premises that were infected or placed in a buffer zone on or after December 31st, 2024. And I want to clarify that a producer can still place birds without conducting or successfully passing a BCAP audit, but they will not be eligible for indemnity if that flock or any future flocks become infected with HPAI until an audit is successfully passed. We also want to clarify that producers must be part of the National Poultry Improvement Plan, or NPIP, and have annual NPIP audits to qualify for the BCAP program. Several of the criteria in the BCAP audit tool are NPIP program standard biosecurity principles. Some of these criteria include having a state-approved written biosecurity plan that meets the 14 NPIP biosecurity principles, sourcing birds and or eggs from currently certified NPIP flocks, proper biosecurity signage, a rodent and pest control program, properly storing feed, and addressing mortality. Moreover, the entirety of the supply chain must meet NPIP standards for the audited premises to be considered an NPIP premises. For qualifying operations, audits must be conducted every 6 months for previously infected sites until the state is declared free from HPAI. Pre-movement audits will be waived if an audit has been conducted and passed within the past 6 months. A representative from the poultry farm may either contact their assigned case manager, the USDA area veterinarian in charge, a CDFA state animal health official, or the included permitting email to request a biosecurity audit, after which an auditor will contact you to request documents and schedule the actual audit. It is important to know that audits for restocking previously infected premises must be conducted in person, whereas buffer zone placement audits may be conducted virtually. Also, just to clarify, if a premises who previously had a virtual audit for a buffer zone placement eventually becomes infected, then they will then require an in-person audit. Here's the contact information that I previously mentioned. So if you are unable to contact your case manager, you may either contact the USDA area veterinarian in charge, the assistant veterinarian in charge, or a state animal health official. The audit covers a review of your biosecurity plans, a visual verification of the required biosecurity measures, and a review of applicable documentation and training records. Since the BCAP audit tool is publicly available, and you can actually Google search it, it should be the first result if you search for HPAI Biosecurity Audit Tool. You can be proactive by reviewing the tool and ensuring that your biosecurity plan and implementations meet the necessary requirements found within. The BCAP audit tool form can also be found through the QR code that's on this slide. The company's poultry biosecurity plan, policies, and procedures must be submitted to the auditor for review prior to the scheduling of the audit. This is due to the amount of remediations that typically end up needing to be made to these documents. Documentation will be requested from you upon being contacted about your premises audit. Once a premises' biosecurity plan and other related documentation are deemed acceptable based on the BCAP audit tool's criteria, the in-person or virtual portion of the audit will be scheduled. Based on BCAP audits that have been conducted so far, we have identified the process of receiving and reviewing company documents as one of the major bottlenecks in the process. If possible, in addition to your provided documents, having a consolidated list of where each BCAP criterion is being met within your documents would help accelerate the completion of the document review portion of the audit. In addition, if you are planning to request a BCAP, we highly recommend utilizing the BCAP audit tool to make sure that all criteria are successfully addressed in your documents before submitting the request. And I'll probably repeat that a few times. If deficiencies are noted during your audit, you will be informed by the auditor, who will then send you a follow-up email with the noted deficiencies. You must provide the auditor with a timeline and expectations for the remediation of all noted deficiencies. Your auditor will then work with you to verify the remediations. It is essential that you maintain transparency and effective communication with your auditor during this period. If you do not pass the audit, you will have the option to follow the reconsideration process. This involves appealing the decision to the auditor, and it needs to be in writing, stating the facts and reasons for the disagreement. Afterward, the completed audit will be reviewed by a BCAP manager who reviews the reconsideration request, the audit package, and the audit reviewer's final audit determination. We expect producers to continue remediation efforts if they have not passed the audit, unless they specifically tell us that they want to undergo the reconsideration process. Regarding the reconsideration process, if the BCAP manager agrees with the producer that submitted an appeal, then they will change the final audit determination to pass, notifying the producer of this change in writing, and then close the reconsideration request. If the BCAP manager agrees that the audit is not a pass, then the reconsideration process continues to a panel review. This panel is made up of state animal health official, the APHIS veterinarian in charge, and a BCAP manager who all review the same materials. This review panel's decision is final. Their decision will be communicated to the producer in writing, stating the reasons for their decision. Please send all audit reconsideration requests to the email in this slide. You may also submit requests to the address listed above, though I'm assuming most people will utilize the email. Some challenges and concerns are possible. Initial documentation review and remediations may take several weeks and will be completed before the in-person or virtual visual verification portion of the audit. The visual verification portion may take up to 2 days to complete, though this may be longer if re-audits are needed. Also, for biosecurity purposes, a 72-hour downtime period is required between in-person audits at different premises. Only USDA-trained auditors may conduct the audits, therefore our current capacity is limited but steadily expanding. As a result, we highly recommend planning several weeks in advance for your audit. Regarding personnel constraints, only USDA-trained auditors may conduct an audit, and this can be either CDFA or USDA staff, but they must have attended the USDA training, and only USDA personnel can review and approve audits. Some commonly identified deficiencies we've observed so far include biosecurity plans and supporting documentation that are insufficiently developed to pass the requirements of the BCAP audit tool, and lacking procedures and detailed information. For example, and I hope you can read this, criterion number 6 in the audit tool here on the right, I'm just using this one as an example, it requires a written complex policy requiring that farm workers do not own non-company birds. So the policy must include that when birds are present on the farm, all persons crossing the line of separation who have had contact with non-company birds must adhere to a minimum 48-hour downtime prior to entry to the line of separation. So within your plan that you provide to us, you must address all aspects of this criterion for it to be deemed acceptable. If your plan only states that farm workers will not own non-company birds, then it is missing the rest of the information that is found in criterion 6 and is therefore not sufficiently meeting the requirements. We've also noticed that some premises maps are not showing the necessary biosecurity measures, such as the perimeter buffer area, lines of separation, and access points that are on the premises. An upcoming slide will have links to biosecurity plan templates that are located on our website secure food supply page. Within these templates, you can find examples of appropriate maps, as well as a tutorial that you can use to make a similar map for your premises. By approaching the BCAP audit tool criteria in this manner, your documents will more likely meet the minimum requirements needed to pass. So to summarize, the details and wording in your written procedures are extremely important, so it is better to be thorough and elaborate on your procedures. A major compliance strategy for producers includes preparing early. The audit tool that is used to conduct the audit can also be found by using the QR code on this slide. It's the same QR code that was on the previous slide. The criteria in the audit tool, as previously discussed, need to be addressed in their entirety within your documentation. In other words, your written documentation must meet the exact requirements of the BCAP audit tool. The requirements must be written into the plan. We cannot accept an email stating that you are doing the requirement. You may also search Google or your preferred search engine for the audit tool, as I previously mentioned. Utilize the audit tool to identify and address any potential deficiencies before the actual audit takes place. Be sure to organize and maintain accurate records and train your personnel so they understand and follow your biosecurity protocols. You can also conduct routine mock audits to prepare for a real one. I know I've said this already, but please utilize the audit tool to make sure that all applicable criteria are properly addressed in your written procedures, biosecurity measures, and records. There are also two new voluntary USDA biosecurity assessments, which I will outline in upcoming slides. We recommend not scheduling a restock ahead of your audit's completion. This is because remediations such as documentation and or physical facility remediations will take time, sometimes longer than expected. Placing birds prior to successfully passing a BCAP audit will affect indemnity eligibility for the life of the flock. Therefore, we highly recommend waiting until your BCAP audit is successfully passed before you schedule your restocking date. And that's a little example calendar I made for you guys. Our Secure Food Supplies website contains various biosecurity plan templates that can assist you in the development of a robust biosecurity plan. You can access these templates via the QR code and the bit link on this slide. To help you bolster your biosecurity, the USDA is now offering free voluntary biosecurity assessments for commercial poultry operations that have more than 500 birds and are not currently affected with HPAI. The two biosecurity assessments are the Biosecurity Incentive Focused Assessment and the Wildlife Biosecurity Assessment, which will be covered on the next slide. Producers can request one or both assessments. With both assessments, USDA will share up to 75% of the costs needed to fix the highest risk biosecurity concerns. Both assessments are voluntary, but strongly encouraged to help strengthen farm defenses against HPAI. The Biosecurity Incentives Focused Assessment, which I will now refer to as BIFA, is another proactive tool for producers that focuses on bolstering structural and operational biosecurity plans and practices. USDA APHIS Veterinary Services will work with producers to review biosecurity documentation and provide feedback in a way that helps identify and address biosecurity gaps before they potentially lead to infected flocks or failed audits. It's especially useful for any producers that want to be proactive by preparing for a future audit. Lastly, if a premises meets commercial definitions and is completing a BIFA, it can be sent to a USDA reviewer for review and approval so it can count as a virtual buffer zone BCAP if the premises ends up in a buffer zone within 6 months after successful completion of the BIFA. If you request a BIFA, please discuss this with the USDA personnel that reply to your inquiry. The Wildlife Biosecurity Assessment focuses on identifying how wildlife may be exposing farms to HPAI. USDA Wildlife Services staff will conduct on-farm assessments and provide recommendations for facility repairs and options for managing wildlife to shield your poultry from the virus. The Wildlife Biosecurity Assessment is intended to be a series of regular engagements between USDA Wildlife Services and producers rather than a one-time service. As previously mentioned, USDA will share up to 75% of the costs to fix the highest risk biosecurity concerns identified by these assessments. As a reminder, these assessments are voluntary, so if you decide you don't want to complete any of the remediations after the assessment, or if you decide to not continue with the assessment itself, you will be able to pull out of it. To request either of these assessments, please utilize the contact information that's on this slide. Here are some key takeaways for what has been covered during this presentation. So biosecurity audits are now required before placement of birds to be eligible for indemnity payments. Failure to pass an audit means no indemnity if infected post-placement. A reconsideration process is available for producers who disagree with an initial audit's determination. Compliance minimizes delays and ensures continued operations. Enhanced biosecurity practices protect individual farms, workers, and the entire industry. 2 free voluntary biosecurity assessments, the BIFA and the Wildlife Biosecurity Assessment, are available for non-infected premises that want to bolster their biosecurity. And lastly, stay informed, so review updates to audit standards and requirements. Here are some additional links and resources. Feel free to use the QR codes if they are more convenient for you. Here are some additional links and resources. And lastly, just another reminder that this is an interim rule, meaning it is effective immediately as of December 31st, 2024. But the USDA is also requesting and will consider public comments. They actually reopened the public comment period on April 14th, 2025. So I just want to thank you for your time. That's it for my portion of this presentation. Next, I believe we will be introducing a new comprehensive biosecurity template that can assist you with BCAP compliance, after which we can take any questions you may have. Thanks.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So as Dr. Vahabi mentioned, the Secure Food Supply Program did put together a template for producers to utilize that will help them with meeting the standards for the biosecurity plan in accordance with BCAP standards. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Maybe. Oh, wrong one. There we go. All right, hopefully folks can see my slide here. So this template that will be available on our Secure Food Supply page for CDFA will walk producers through all of the individual steps for answering the questions in that BCAP audit tool and meet the standards for the BCAP audit. It walks producers through essentially a condensed version of our comprehensive poultry plan and highlights the associated BCAP audit tool criteria that are referenced so that producers can reference the audit tool and see the exact wording that is on that audit tool that they need to address in their plan. So for example, it has links in here for you to be able to create your map and identify the line of separation, as well as the various biosecurity measures that are on place on your farm. It walks you through in a description of that line of separation and references, as I said, the BCAP tool where those criteria can be found. So that's
Kavishni?
Yes.
There's a comment asking if you can enlarge your screen a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see it. There we go.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go back up a little bit. So for those who aren't familiar with our Secure Food Supply page, there is a mapping tool on there that will help facilitate creating your premise map and help you label the map so that you're able to create a premise map that will meet standards and provide the information that the auditor needs in order to conduct the document review and then do the audit of your premises. The reason why we are hopping on the document review being done before scheduling your audit is because we have to audit your biosecurity measures against your plan. we are validating that you're doing what you say that you're going to do. So we need to know what you're going to do before we go and validate it. So this is why this is the longest part of the audit, is this document review section. And this is the plan is the part of this that is one of the biggest bottlenecks. So that we created this template so that folks can basically just walk themselves through creating the templates, create their plan that will meet the standards. Let's see, if we scroll down a little bit, it walks you through the perimeter buffer area. One of the nice things about it is it does provide all of these boxes are fillable and will be expandable, so that you can just free text write as much as you want, and it will expand to fill in what information you need to put in there. Wherever it says to describe an SOP, we need to see your SOP written out as detailed as possible. Even if, as a premises, you utilize a company biosecurity plan, that company biosecurity plan must be described in a manner that the auditor can identify all your biosecurity measures that are in place and that meet all the standards for the BCAP program. So there's questions on personnel, PPE usage. It separates out PPE usage versus for reusable PPE versus disposable PPE. If sections are not applicable because on your premises you do not use reusable PPE, then you indicate not applicable and you state that it's not applicable, do not use reusable PPE, and you continue moving on. We highly recommend that you fill in all the boxes. Even if it is not applicable or you do not do that particular process, indicate not applicable or does not apply, and this is why. So that we know that you've addressed all the parameters for the BCAP program in your plan. So I think that is about all of it, really. As I said, this will be available on our website for folks to download, utilize, and create their biosecurity plan as needed. I think, yeah, we can address some of the questions that are in the chat. I think Dr. Bradley and Dr. Bahavi addressed a couple of them already. Yep. I'd like to highlight, yes, what was said in the chat, that this interim rule took effect December 31st. So any premises that was infected prior to December 31st, when you restocked, you did a state-based audit. Now that the rule is in place, any infection that occurs from December 31st forward, or if you are in a buffer zone that is established from December 31st forward of 2024, you will be required to have and pass a BCAP audit in order for your flocks to be eligible for indemnity. So as was the question in the chat, that particular premise that was referenced was infected prior to December 31st. So they were eligible to retain indemnity by having a state-based audit. Were that particular premise to end up in a control area at this point, it is now 6 months past their last audit, they will have to pass a BCAP audit in order for that flock to now be eligible for indemnity. So technically both are right. Let me see, a couple other things that came up, and I don't know if you want to address them, Matt. I think one of the things that has come up a couple times and has kind of led into a couple hiccups is the question around the NPIP supply chain. We do want to highlight that the entirety of your supply chain must meet NPIP standards. It is not sufficient for you to only source your eggs from a NPIP hatchery, but if you are sending your eggs to a brooder or to a pullet ranch, those ranches, those intermediate ranches must all pass an NPIP audit in order for your supply chain to be an NPIP approved chain, for your premise to be NPIP approved as well. So it's not sufficient for the end and the beginning to be NPIP. Everything in between has also to meet NPIP standards. That's one of the things that we've run into with the document review, is that documentation of those audits or those assessments are not available. And that is something that will be requested and will be required when that document review happens during this audit. So between now and whenever we have our next infected premises, folks ought to start working on trying to get that documentation and figuring out where their supply chain is in regards to meeting those standards. And then the reconsideration timeline, I don't know if Dr. Smith wants to answer that one or Dr. Vahabi, but for the reconsideration timeline, is it 14 days from the producer being notified of failing the audit that they have to submit?
Yes, that's correct. 14 days. In writing. So,
Yeah.
And just to build on that, so in case some of the participants didn't read the comments, we will be providing a copy of the presentation, and we'll also have the recording made available after the webinar. So all of the links and the QR codes that I included in the presentation that I just presented, you'll be able to utilize all of those.
And as Matt has highlighted, I would highly encourage producers to review and download that audit tool so that they familiarize themselves with the standards that they're being measured against. The first 3/4 of that is all documentation. The last quarter, or 1/3 really, is the actual audit itself, the validation of your plan. And the individual things in that audit tool that the auditor is looking for that are very specific, from the wording of your plan to the way your visitor log is set up. For example, on that visitor log, you need to have on there the visitor's name, company name or affiliation, why they're there, if they're going to enter the LOS, the reason that they have to enter the LOS, and also whether or not they've had exposure to poultry or birds within the last 48 hours. All of those need to be on your visitor log, and it needs to be reflected in the documents that you submit to your auditor. If that's not on there, it's going to slow down the process, and it's going to be sent back to you for remediations. So going through that audit tool now, familiarizing yourself with the criteria and what you're being measured against will help speed up the process later on. And then, as Matt mentioned, doing a BIFA or audit now allows you to be eligible for that 75% cost share with the USDA, as well as will allow you to have a little bit of a leg up, were you to end up in a control area in the next 6 months from that audit. So you're eligible to restock at that point because you've already passed the biosecurity audit within the last 6 months, provided that you end up in one within 6 months of that BIFA being done. Not sure if any of other CDFA counterparts or USDA counterparts want to highlight any other additional items on the BCAP program.
I just wanted to make a comment. So I appreciate all of your comments, Kavishti. When we are doing a BCAP audit and we're reviewing the documentation, just to give you an idea of what we're actually doing. So if I have 2 monitors in front of me, one of my monitors has the BCAP audit tool pulled up with all of the criteria, and then the other monitor has all of the documentation that's been provided to me. So I'm going through both of them to see if I can find where each of the criteria are, met within the documents that you've provided to me. So I sort of view it as the answer key. So it's like we have a test and we're already given the answer key. So you want to utilize that answer key to make sure that everything within the answer key is reflected in your documentation that you provide to us. So that's the approach that I would take if I were a producer right now. And I hope that made sense.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but only a USDA auditor. So that USDA trained, when only USDA is allowed to do BIFAs or the wildlife biosecurity assessments, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. So for the BIFA and the wildlife biosecurity assessment, those are both going to be conducted by USDA personnel. So you'll be working with them. And when you review the copy of the presentation that we're going to provide to everyone, that'll be on our website. The contact information is within the presentation that I just gave in case anyone missed that portion of this webinar. So it'll all be in there.
And I can comment on that too. The wildlife biosecurity assessments will go to be assigned to one of the wildlife services employees in the state. And the biosecurity incentive focused audits, the BIFA audits, will be assigned to another USDA employee, not necessarily within BS, but some other USDA employees that have been trained to conduct the audits. So, yeah, we get the results of the audit, and we'll work with the producers on the cost share portion of it once those parts are finished. But yeah, wildlife biosecurity assessment goes to wildlife services, and the BIF audits will go to a virtual auditor.
Not to pick on you, Rob, but you have any comments you want to provide as far as the template or any of the hiccups you've run into with the audits that you want to highlight?
It's really the big issue is start your preparation now. And from my point of view, the areas that people are failing to pass a BCAP audit is, number one, is they're not prepared. Even though we send them the audit tool, it's not the same type of audit you went through to get a permit. It's very detailed and very exact. Look at the audit tool and compare it to your documentation, because documentation is right now is where people are getting hung up. The physical remediations, patching a hole in the side of a building, that's easy. That can be done when the auditor's there. But rewriting a company biosecurity plan can take a lot longer. CDFA is available to help, but you have to remember, the closer we get to HPAI season, the availability of staff time is going to be decreased because we're either going to be in response mode or getting ready to respond. If you think you're ready, schedule a mock audit with us, and let's run through it on that. But read the BCAP tool and make sure that it's in the plan and in your documentation as written in the plan. Don't skip over anything. Don't assume, oh yeah, we don't do that. See, the sign on the door doesn't let our unauthorized visitors in. If it's not in the plan, I can't pass you on that. So it's explicitly clear on that. So lastly, the USDA reviewers that are going to be reviewing the audit that we submit to them, they're not necessarily going to be familiar with your premises, especially if that plan goes all the way to national. So work with the auditor to get those things tightened up. That's your best chance of passing the BCAP audit on that. The other thing that's really important is make sure that your NPIP inspections, documentations are clearly showing that you passed. So if you're getting chicks from an NPIP hatchery, we need to see that verification that the hatchery is NPIP. If you're sending those chicks to another farm in your chain to grow out, that farm also has to be NPI inspected and it has to pass. And then finally, the last grow out farm would have to pass as well. So that's where it was said all components in the chain need to be NPIP passed. So don't necessarily assume because you pass an NPIP inspection that you're going to pass a BCAP, because the BCAP is very stringent. It goes into a lot more detail than what is required for a regular audit review of your plan for NPIP staff on that. I'm available to help out. I've helped producers clarify procedures and develop procedures. I offer my time to everyone on that. But again, as we get closer to September, the likelihood of me being available to help you guys out is unlikely. The audit tool is going to be pushed out here soon. It's a combination of enhanced biosecurity and BCAP principles on that. I'm not necessarily married to it. If you guys review it or using it, you have suggestions that might make the tool better, let us know and we can do that. We want to streamline that as much as possible. And lastly, when you submit your documentation to us, it really slows us down if you're submitting hundreds of pages from 4 or 5 different manuals. Try to look at the audit tool and get us what we need and help us out by identifying in that documentation the BCAP requirements on there so we don't have to read and read and read through it. I know it was stated that a document review can take about 2 days. That's if everything's in order and everything is perfect. You have to remember, we're not the state organization that does the NPIP audit, so we're not familiar with your NPIP plans. In actuality, I would say if a company was to submit documents for review, their biosecurity plan, I'd say minimum for you to get a response back, meaning a list of remediations, 1 week, 7 days. So please plan ahead. That's it. Oh, there's one more component to the template. The template was devised to be company-wide. However, there are 2 components that you'll need to complete for your individual premises. There's a short intake form, which has like the company address, your NPIN number, type of operation, that you'll need to fill out, submit, and then there's the biosecurity maps that you'll need to fill out and submit as well. And then you'll submit that along with the BCAP template and the supporting documentation. So a lot of people don't think about the supporting documentation. In that BCAP template, there are requirements for what's supposed to be on a visitor log. Read it and make sure that those requirements on that log, they're there when you submit it to us, or it's a fail. That's all I have, Kavishi. Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions that folks have at this point? And if there are companies on here who wish, we are open to having one-on-one discussions with you guys. If there are other sort of nuances to your setup that you wish to discuss, that you have questions as far as how it plays in with the BCAP program, how to structure your biosecurity plan. If it's a company-wide plan, we're more than willing to have a discussion and talk you through how to structure that plan. And like Rob mentioned, the template is available for folks to utilize to do just that. If you've noticed that some of it is a little bit not clear, please let us know and we can clarify some of those items if it's not completely obvious.
I do have a quick question that one of our producers, it came up and wanted to see if company-wide versus farm-specific, it was kind of stated that every facility or every premise needs to have its own biosecurity plan. Is that the case, or can you still use a company-wide biosecurity plan?
So I think Rob was kind of touching on this a little bit. You can have a company-wide biosecurity plan. However, there are nuances to an individual site where things aren't going to be set up exactly the same. So that's where the intake form comes in with that individual premise map. So that you can use a company plan, but if we go do that audit and there are nuances that you haven't addressed in your plan, then you're going to fail. So once you have addressed those nuances that are specific to that particular premise, then you ought to be able to utilize a company-wide policy plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Rob?
Yeah, I was just gonna, that's good that the question was brought up too. Remember those three components, the intake form, the maps, and the company-wide template that you would have to submit for each premises that you're gonna do a BCAP audit on. And keep in mind, you need to make sure, like Kavishi said, that those procedures that are in that biosecurity plan that you're submitting to us, that you're doing them on all of those premises. If the physical audit shows that you're not, it's going to be a failure. The physical audit, in addition to looking at mitigations on the farm, we're looking to see that what you say in your plan, you're doing it at the farm. So that's the only catch. If you have farms where you're operating differently, like organic, let's say, might be run a little bit differently, you might want to consider developing two different plans to submit for those.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, this last round of high path that we just went through is a pretty good example of it. As long as we are considered infected as a state, every 6 months, you will have to undergo, as an infected prem, you will have to do another biosecurity audit until we declare freedom from disease. So let's say, for example, for heaven forbid, we end up with a poultry prem that is infected in August. Then if we are still dealing with high path 6 months later, that infected prem, once they've undergone a BCAP audit, will have to go another one, so that they can be out and continue to undergo BCAP sequential BCAP audits. Even if they're not restocking at that point, they're still going to have to continue to do recap audits every 6 months until we're free of disease. No, it
Hey,
does not
yeah,
include dairy.
Thank you.
No, the disease freedom or freedom from disease is a poultry definition. And so therefore, yeah, it doesn't include dairy. So we don't have to be free from high pathogen dairy to be considered disease free by USDA/WAR standards.
There's a question in the
Yeah.
chat from Lupita about, is the BCAP audit only for poultry farms that were affected? So for any eligible commercial poultry premises that were infected on or after December 31st, 2024, they would need a BCAP audit to be successfully passed before being eligible for indemnity for any future placements. It's also going to be applicable for any buffer zone premises, which I went over in the beginning of the presentation. So if you weren't able to attend at that time to see me presenting that slide, we'll have copies of the presentation available that you can go and review. So it's for buffer zone premises, which are just surrounding certain infected premises. And then it's also for infected premises. And they need to be eligible commercial premises that were infected on or after December 31st. And then for the buffer zone placements, it's for any of the eligible premises that are within a buffer zone on or after December 31st, 2024. So I hope that made sense. If it didn't, just let me know.
And then the question as far as a farm infected prior to December 31st, if you end up in a control zone at any point after December 31st, you will require a BCAP audit to restock in order to be eligible for indemnity. So December 31st is the cut point. Any infections after December 31st, or if you end up in a control area after December 31st, 2024, you will be required to have a BCAP audit in order to restock. And then who is the current NPIP inspecting agency for farms below the population minimums? So non-commercials? Then I'll put you on the spot, Alexi, but if you or
No,
Laura
that's
want to.
okay. Dr. Reimers, I'm just trying to understand your question. So for who is the current NPIP inspecting agency for farms that are not a commercial USDA standard farm? Are you just asking for people who are NPIP participants that aren't commercial? Or are you asking what kind of standards a non-commercial facility will have to fulfill during an outbreak? I'm not sure if we might have to unmute you, Dr. Reimers. 1 second.
She wrote yes in the chat.
Okay, so just to kind of clarify, so BCAP and everything that's required for them for indemnity only really is applying to commercial farms, and that's a USDA set standard. I believe their ruling on that has a couple of different numbers. They may update those numbers in the future. We'll see. But right now, everyone smaller than that during an outbreak is going to be eligible, to my understanding, for indemnity. We in the state will have separate biosecurity requirements during an outbreak in order for you to have continuity of business and be able to sell product and move birds on and off your property. And that's just to make sure that we are protecting you during an outbreak and that you are protecting others as well. Does that answer your question, Dr. Reimers? and for small pullet farms feeding larger ones. So I guess in the egg laying industry, the pullet farm would still be a part of their business or would be a separate business. I know NPIP certification of pullets is a little bit different than an egg farm or a hatchery. So as long as it's part of the system, so it's receiving NPIP hatched birds going to a pullet farm, and then those pullets are then going to an NPIP approved farm, then that's within the same chain and they should be good. Art, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I just ran into this exemption with another new producer. You kind of have to be careful to read. I think it's part 53 for HPAI indemnity. Even though you are exempt, they may be exempt, under that cap. You still have to follow certain rules for exemption under Part 53, which lists out HPAI indemnity. So you kind of have to look at both. And the only reason why I'm kind of understanding some of this information is because I'm dealing with it right now. But so you may be exempt on one side of things, but if you look at the other, you still have to or follow some requirements to get indemnified. So that's just a little thing that I recently discovered.
And I see another question in the chat for Karen. Is BCAP just for restocking, or will it be needed for permits to move feed birds and other needs during quarantine? It's just for indemnity for restocking. So you can theoretically place birds and just forfeit indemnity until you complete a BCAP. And then for, doing permits and all that stuff, either a BCAP or a continuity of business biosecurity, as we've done in the past for our state.
Alexio Art, I just want to circle back to that the pullet ranch question there, because it seems like it's a bit of a gray zone for these smaller pullet farms who don't quite meet the criteria by USDA standard as being commercial, because they are part of that NPIP chain. In order for the premises, let's say it's that egg layer facility to be NPIP, that pullet ranch also needs to have an NPIP assessment done, correct?
Are you referring to a BCAP assessment or just the biosecurity, the 14 principle NPIP?
The NPIP, just straight NPIP. NPIP assessment to basically maintain that NPIP supply chain.
Yes, they should.
Yep.
And most of our, even like our egg layers for Part 146, even though they don't meet that, I think it's 30,000. Was it 30,000? Most of them still participate in NPIP, even though they're under that, that threshold. They still participate. Most of our egg layers here in the state participate in NPIP.
Dr. Ramos, is your question more who is the official state agency for NPIP in California? Is that your question? In which case, it's CPF.
It's
I think the
it's
question is
California
more-
Poultry Federation.
Yeah, so CPF will be responsible for NPIP inspections, and then BCAP and the continuity of business audits during outbreaks will be this state employee generally.
And we do work with CDFA really closely. They do our hatchery inspections. They help out and assist. And so we work hand in hand with NPIP.
Not sure if you can see the chart, Art, but I think this is a question you may have to answer from Dr. Rama's. CPF will inspect exempt premises. Will CPF inspect exempt premises?
Well, it might be a question I might have to find the answer to. I don't know it right offhand, Dr. Reimers, but let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add, Art, nothing will change about how NPIP inspections will happen. Those will still go on as normal. This will just be a separate layer of inspections during outbreaks that they are using NPIP as the base model and requirements.
I believe you're saying something, Lupita.
She said no in the chat.
Okay, great. Any other questions? This has been a really good discussion. Hope folks are a little bit more comfortable with the concept of the BCAP audit and what is to be expected. It is, as mentioned, it is an interim rule. It was still in its comment period, so obviously there are some wrinkles and unforeseen secondary and tertiary effects of some of the decision making, but this is where we're at right now. So hopefully this has been a helpful and useful presentation for folks. If folks have questions, feel free to forward them on to us. I believe in the presentation you'll have Dr. Vahabi's contact info. Here we have another question. If a BCAP audit is needed during outbreaks, since an outbreak can happen tomorrow, would that require an audit every 6 months? So if we had an outbreak tomorrow and the premises is infected, at whichever point down the road, let's say it's a month from now, you finally are cleaned up and eligible to restock, you conduct your BCAP audit. You've passed your BCAP audit. From that point of passing that BCAP audit, your timeline will start. If California is still responding to high path in poultry 6 months from that point, then your premises as a former infected premises will have to undergo another BCAP audit to validate that you are still doing what you said you were doing. Because as is the case, and as many of us who have been managers know, procedural drift happens. And so the USDA sort of identified 6 months as that break point where things tend to fall off the rails and the risk of infection gets to a point that it is significant. So they've identified the 6 month mark as the mark at which they would like to have another audit done on that formerly infected premises to ensure that you are doing what you said you were doing when we audited you the first time. Hopefully that kind of clears it up a little bit, Steve. Okay, sounds like I may have rambled on enough there. So seeing as there are no additional questions, say thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. Feel free to reach out to any of us at any point.